Arthur Dutch Schultz Flegenheimer, an audacious figure in the Prohibition era, was likely the last of the big-time independent criminal operators in New York City. As a bootlegging kingpin and gambling czar, his influence spanned the Bronx and beyond, commanding fear and respect even outside the Mafia's traditional ranks. Unlike many contemporaries, Schultz never became an inducted member of the Mafia, though his personal and business ties with its members were pivotal in his rise, and ultimately in his fall. His brazen attempt to eliminate a powerful prosecutor highlighted his volatile nature and sealed his place as a legendary, however, doomed figure in organized crime. Arthur Flegenheimer was born at 1690 2nd Avenue off 89th Street on August 6, 1901. His German Jewish immigrant parents were not religious and had never taken him to a synagogue. However, he later explored different religions, often turning to them in times of crisis. His father, Hermann Flegenheimer, worked various jobs, a glazier, then a baker, and eventually ran a livery stable. When Arthur was 14, his father died, or at least, that is what he told people. However, there were conflicting stories about Hermann's fate. Some suggest Hermann deserted the family in 1910, but his mother, Emma, noted in her naturalization records that Hermann had actually died in 1910. Nevertheless, his father wasn't present, and that would deeply impact young Arthur's life. Emma Flegenheimer eventually took her family and relocated from Yorkville to the lower Bronx. Arthur attended Public School 12, where his principal, Dr. John F. Condon, would later become infamous for handling the $50,000 ransom in the Lindbergh baby kidnapping case. Arthur stayed at PS 12 until the 8th grade, enjoying history and composition classes, but had to leave at the age of 14 to help support his family. The family were in such dire straits that Arthur's mother was working as the janitor of a tenement and had also taken in washing, starching, and ironing clothes and household linens to support her children. To make money, Arthur sold newspapers and cut-rate 2-cent transfers that allowed passengers to switch from the elevated train to the subway at the busy 149th Street and 3rd Avenue station in the South Bronx. He also ran errands and worked as an office boy. As he grew older, Arthur took on jobs in printing, working as a feeder and pressman, and even did composition roofing at the age of 17. He made extra cash as a pool hustler, and he had a reputation as a nimble fighter who knew how to handle a cue stick in a bar brawl. He found like-minded individuals as his mother moved from one struggling neighborhood to another in the Bronx. As a young man, Arthur frequented the Bergen Social Club, a hotspot for younger hoodlums among his peers. Along the way, he connected with Marcel Poffo, a local hoodlum known for his significant police record, who advanced from petty burglaries to serious bank robberies before being found dead with multiple bullet and knife wounds. Poffo's body would be found on a desolate piece of land near the Westchester Country Club in Harrison in 1933. At first, Marcel Poffo acted as Arthur's mentor, teaching him the ropes of street crime, stealing packages from delivery trucks, looting neighborhood stores, breaking into apartments, and extorting protection money from dice games. During this time, Arthur was caught red-handed while burglarizing a Bronx apartment. In December 1919, Arthur was convicted of unlawful entry and sentenced to what was then an indeterminate term served at the Blackwell Island Penitentiary. This penitentiary was a harsh facility on the East River known for its difficult conditions and near impossible escape due to treacherous tides. Arthur was not an ideal prisoner, and the experience certainly did nothing to rehabilitate him. In fact, he was so unruly that he was transferred to a tougher prison, West Hampton Farms. He didn't care for that institution either and managed to escape, but was recaptured within 15 hours, resulting in 2 additional months being added to his sentence. Newspapers say 30 days was added. However, this would be the only significant prison time Arthur Flegenheimer would ever serve. After serving his time in Blackwell's Island and West Hampton, he emerged from prison, hardened and ready for a new identity. He adopted the name Dutch Schultz, allegedly inspired by a feared fighter from the early days of the rival Frog Hollow gang. Arthur never seemed to stand out in a crowd. He was of average height, somewhat reserved, and had a medium build. He had a nose that had clearly been broken at least once, added to his nondescript look. Unlike many gangsters who flaunted their expensive tailored suits, Schultz had a reputation for dressing sloppily. His ill-fitting suits were often wrinkled and in need of a good cleaning. A heavy smoker and tobacco chewer, his clothes carried a distinct odor. One reporter noted that Schultz looked like a poorly dressed drifter and had an uncanny ability to appear as a man who had never found success. Arthur's friends attempted to upgrade his look by gifting him silk shirts and fashionable ties. However, the high-end shirts never quite matched his cheap, low-quality suits. Arthur believed his friends were throwing away their money on men's fashion. Even Lucky Luciano once said that Schultz was one of the cheapest people he had ever met. Later, all grown up and dressed in a jaunty cap while still chewing his tobacco, Arthur enjoyed watching the more affluent patrons of the Dry Decade as they visited the Criterion restaurant. The Criterion restaurant in the Hub was run by Billy Gibson, a former manager of boxers Gene Tunney and Benny Leonard. He also frequented Jack Legs Diamond's Bronx Theatrical Club across the street. These glimpses into the upper crust of Bronx society likely inspired Arthur to see the potential profits in beer and liquor, especially during Prohibition, when Washington had prohibited the manufacture, transportation, and sale of alcohol. In his early 20s, Arthur became involved with a gang led by John Thomas Diamond, better known as Legs Diamond, a shady figure engaged in drug and liquor smuggling. Arthur's role was to ride shotgun on Diamond's liquor trucks to guard against hijackers. On many occasions, he also protected the stolen liquor from additional hijackings. Diamond's specialty was hijacking booze from rival gangs, particularly targeting the Dwyer Syndicate, a major rum-running operation that controlled a significant portion of New York's illegal liquor trade. In the world of gangsters, Legs Diamond stood out as a particularly unstable and dissolute figure with a lust for blood and torture. His unpredictable behavior ranged from polite and affable to violently ferocious. An acquaintance described him as a killer, a snake, a king cobra, and a conscienceless rat. Diamond's peers offered various reasons for his nickname, Legs. Some claimed he earned it in his youth as a truck bouncer, a thief who would snatch packages from delivery trucks and quickly flee. Others believed it was due to his constant activity, as he was always on the move and rarely stayed in one place. Some suggested it referred to his long, gangly legs and nimble dance moves. Bitter gang members, however, said the nickname suited him because he often abandoned his lieutenants, leaving them to face legal troubles alone. Moreover, he would leg it. As police officers were transporting a Diamond associate to prison, a reporter asked what he thought of Legs. The gangster said that Legs had double-crossed him and that he was a no-good son of a... Another subordinate also facing prison accused Legs of undermining his defense, that he had fixed everything up and that he hoped Legs would get his head blown off. Dutch Schultz briefly took orders from Legs Diamond, but the arrangement was short-lived. Arthur had no interest in bowing to anyone and saw them as complete opposites. Diamond was violent and impulsive, charging ahead without considering the consequences of his actions. He craved attention and crafted a public persona as a tough-talking, gun-wielding mobster. In contrast, Arthur approached his criminal activities with a calculated, business-like mindset. Arthur would avoid the spotlight, stay focused on his operations, and build a highly efficient criminal organization. In his mid-20s, Arthur became involved with Joey Noy, whose father cleaned beer pipes and discovered that there was more money to be made in the beer itself than in cleaning pipes. These simple economics appealed to both Joey and Arthur. Joey took the first step, opening a small speakeasy in a Brook Avenue tenement, and named it the Hub Social Club. Eventually, he brought Arthur in as a partner. This was in 1928, which marked the beginning of a business partnership that would only be ended by enemy gunfire. In their mid-20s, Joey and Arthur used their profits from the Brook Avenue speakeasy to establish several other illegal bars. They quickly realized they could also supply beer to their competitors. To do this, all they needed were 3 old trucks, then a partnership with a brewer named Frankie Dunn in Union City, New Jersey, and last but not least, they needed muscle. As in any profit-driven venture, Joey and Arthur inevitably encountered obstacles, particularly from 2 brothers, John and Joe Rock, who had already established themselves in the Bronx before the duo entered the scene. While John Rock eventually stepped aside after some initial resistance, his brother Joe, made of tougher Irish stock, refused to back down from the beer trade. His defiance came at a steep cost. He was kidnapped one night, brutally beaten, hung by his thumbs on a meat hook, and then blindfolded with a strip of gauze allegedly soaked in a concoction containing gonorrhea drippings, or so the story goes. Whatever the mixture was, Joe Rock emerged from the ordeal blind, and there were even rumors that his family had to pay a $35,000 ransom to recover what remained of him. By now, Joey and Arthur had assembled a formidable team around them. Bo Weinberg was one of their key enforcers, while Vincent Call and his younger brother Peter were part of the organization. Larry Carney, a tough and early Schultz loyalist, was involved, along with Fatty Walsh, who would become an Arnold Rothstein bodyguard and would later be killed in a shootout during a Coral Gables card game. Joey Rayo, rising in the rackets and preparing to establish himself in East Harlem, took on occasional strong-arm jobs, as did Edward Fats McCarthy, also known as Edward Popke, a renowned hitman. The duo's operation expanded rapidly, branching out into hard liquor alongside beer, and the spirits ferried from Jersey soon proved too slow to keep up with the demand. Joey and Arthur had to strike additional deals with Francis "Frenchie" Dillon and Jay Culhane, who ran breweries on both sides of the river. One of the Neu-Schultz distribution points, an underground facility known as the Tins, was so elaborate that it became a near showpiece. Located near the Mott Haven Railroad yards, it featured disappearing elevators that would lower empty beer trucks into a massive loading area and send them back up, fully stocked, ready for distribution. These trucks didn't just serve the Bronx. They began making their way into Manhattan's Upper West Side, Washington Heights, Yorkville, and Harlem. What had started as a modest wholesale operation was now a booming business. As their enterprise grew, the young entrepreneurs began buying beer from major figures like Oni Madden and William Big Bill Dwyer. They had now officially entered the big leagues. Having outgrown their base at the Brook Avenue HQ, Joey and Arthur relocated to an office building on East 149th Street. This move brought them into direct competition with Legs Diamond. On October 16, 1928, at 7 a.m., Joey Noy was ambushed outside the Chateau Madrid nightclub on West 54th Street near 6th Avenue. This happened while Arthur was reportedly meeting with rum runner William Dwyer. Despite wearing a bulletproof vest, Joey was shot multiple times in the chest and lower spine. He managed to return fire, and witnesses saw a blue Cadillac lose a door as it sped away. An hour later, police found the Cadillac abandoned with a dead gunman in the back seat. Joey was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital but died from his injuries 3 weeks later, on November 21st in the Bellevue Hospital prison ward. The shot-up body on the back seat of the blue Cadillac was that of Louis Weinberg, however, no relation to Abraham Bo Weinberg. When later questioned, Arthur told Acting Police Inspector Joseph Donovan that Joey had gone to Jersey to handle a beer transaction, and upon hearing about the shooting, he went there himself because the business had to go on. Arthur was more forthcoming with a detective friend, admitting that Noy had gone to the Chateau Madrid carrying thousands of dollars to settle a large beer deal. Another version suggested that Noy was actually on an errand to collect money owed by Diamond. Years later, Dixie Davis, Arthur's attorney, supported this theory, adding his own flair by claiming that Noy had indeed gone downtown to resolve an issue with Diamond, and that Arthur was in Big Bill Dwyer's office nearby when the shots were fired. The loss of Joey Noy, however tragic, offered a significant silver lining for Dutch Schultz. He inherited the business and soon expanded it, taking his criminal enterprise to new heights. Brothers Peter and Vincent Cole were key members of Dutch Schultz's inner circle. Arthur first encountered the Cole brothers during their childhood in the Morrisania district of the Bronx. Vincent Cole, the younger of the two, showed early signs of a troubled life, marked by a reckless streak that hinted at his future in the criminal world. At just 11 years old, he was labeled a disorderly child by the court and sent to the Immaculate Virgin Mission for rehabilitation. However, the mission's efforts to reform him were unsuccessful, and Cole quickly returned to the streets. His delinquency continued, leading to a burglary arrest and a stint at a Catholic protectory facility, which also failed to curb his unruly behavior. As a young adult, Vincent Cole found himself repeatedly cycling through the justice system. He was regularly arrested, served brief prison terms, and then returned to the criminal underworld. Despite these frequent interruptions, Cole managed to earn Arthur's trust and became his reliable right-hand man. In March 1930, Vincent Cole was arrested for his role in a murder case involving a dance hall hostess and a slot machine racketeer in the Bronx. The intended target was the racketeer, Carmine Borelli, who had parked his car in a public garage. As he and the hostess, May Smith, walked to the street corner, a car pulled up and 4 gunmen emerged. They opened fire, with Smith accidentally caught in the crossfire. She fell after running a few yards screaming for help, and as she lay on the ground, 2 of the gunmen shot her in the back. Meanwhile, the other assailants chased Borelli, cornering him on a garage ramp where he was hit multiple times and died instantly. The gunmen then fled the scene. Smith was taken to the hospital in a taxi but succumbed to her injuries before her arrival. The police suspected that slot machine racketeer Carmine Borelli had crossed Dutch Schultz, leading to the belief that Schultz ordered the hit. In this scenario, Vincent Cole was allegedly the lead gunman. After his arrest and interrogation, Vincent faced charges of homicide and a felony violation of the Sullivan gun law. Although the murder charges were eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence, Vincent remained in jail on the gun charge until Schultz, despite his reputation for frugality, paid his $10,000 bail. Schultz was incensed by the botched operation. He berated his henchmen, criticizing the murders as crude and unprofessional. While eliminating a rival mobster was acceptable, shooting an unarmed woman like the dance hall hostess was not. After expressing his fury, Schultz ordered the Cole brothers and 2 other gang members to leave immediately. Naturally, the ousted gangsters accused Schultz of betrayal. They had carried out his orders to kill the slot machine racketeer, only to be dismissed without commendation. In retaliation, they formed their own gang and aimed to take over Schultz's beer operations in Harlem and the Bronx, igniting a gang war. Amidst this conflict, Vincent Cole, while still engaged in the battle with Schultz, began an affair with the wife of another mobster. The woman, infatuated with Cole, provided him with significant financial support, which he used to open a speakeasy in the Bronx. Schultz saw this as a bold challenge to his domain. In response, Schultz orchestrated a police raid on Cole's speakeasy, seizing his liquor and shutting it down, which caused Cole substantial financial losses. Believing Schultz was behind the raid, the Cole gang retaliated by murdering 2 of Dutch Schultz's men. Schultz didn't wait long to retaliate. The night of May 30th, 1931, as Peter Cole was driving down a city street, a car pulled up alongside and gunmen opened fire. The windshield was shattered by multiple bullets, hitting Peter and causing his car to crash into a wall. However, he died before help could arrive. The police suspected Schultz's men were responsible for the shooting. Vincent Cole believed Schultz had indeed ordered the attack, but thought it was a case of mistaken identity. He feared that the hit was meant for him and not his brother Peter. This belief led Vincent to avoid attending Peter's funeral, as he feared being gunned down himself. Instead, he watched from a safe distance. Just days after Peter Cole's funeral, Vincent Cole led his crew to a garage where Schultz kept his trucks and equipment. They launched a surprise attack on Schultz's men, gaining the upper hand. However, rather than using their advantage to harm Schultz's soldiers, the Cole gang made a risky move. They ordered Schultz's men to destroy the Dutchman's property, including trucks, slot machines, bar fixtures, and vending machines, using axes and sledgehammers. Surprisingly, having the tools at hand, Schultz's men complied with the orders without retaliating. That night, upon learning about the attack, Schultz assessed the damage and then set out with his lieutenants to find Cole. The two gangs engaged in a high-speed chase across the city, exchanging gunfire from their cars. The running battle resulted in no fatalities, likely due to the difficulty of shooting accurately from moving vehicles. The mob conflict simmered for a few weeks but flared up again when Cole's gun felony case went to trial. Vincent's failure to appear in court meant he forfeited the $10,000 cash bail Schultz had provided. Cole's absence was likely a deliberate act of revenge against Schultz, hitting the beer baron where it hurt most, his finances. This loss deepened Schultz's animosity towards Vincent Cole. While Dutch Schultz was embroiled in his feud with Vincent Cole, he also faced legal troubles. In June 1931, Schultz and 4 of his men were involved in a gunfight with police detectives on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. The conflict started when Schultz's group mistook the detectives for rival gangsters and pursued them. During the shootout, Schultz discarded his weapon and fled, but the police apprehended him. Although Schultz escaped injury, one of his lieutenants, Danny Amasha, was shot in the abdomen and died later that night. At the police station, Schultz attempted to secure his release by offering bribes to 2 detectives, promising each a house and $50,000, but his offer was refused. He was charged with attempted felonious assault on a police officer and violations of the Sullivan gun law, with bail set at a staggering $150,000. This amount was exceptionally high, even for a notorious figure like Schultz. After a subsequent hearing, his bail was reduced to $75,000. Despite the substantial evidence against him, Schultz was acquitted at trial. A rise in major crimes in the Bronx led law enforcement to intensify their efforts against racketeers, especially Schultz, in the early 1930s. The district attorney launched a campaign to drive Schultz out by disrupting his operations. Authorities conducted frequent raids on Schultz's Westchester Grill, a spot more known for its drinking than dining, and placed constant police surveillance on his Bronx speakeasies. The raids were relentless, with the police hitting Schultz's main speakeasy multiple times a day. Eventually, Schultz moved his headquarters, but the police quickly followed, monitoring the new location and raiding it frequently. They also tapped his phone lines and seized his beer trucks. Facing mounting pressure, Schultz relocated his operations to Manhattan, according to gangland sources. In July 1931, a tragic event shocked even the most jaded New Yorkers. In Harlem's Little Italy, as children played near a lemonade stand on East 107th Street, the peaceful scene was shattered by gunfire. Gunmen in an open touring car suddenly opened fire with shotguns and pistols, aiming for a man outside the Helmer Social Club, a known hangout for mobster Joe Rayo's gang. While the intended target escaped unscathed by dropping to the ground, the indiscriminate bullets struck 4 children playing nearby, as well as a toddler in a baby carriage. The most heartbreaking outcome was the death of 5-year-old Michael Vengali, who succumbed to his injuries despite doctors' efforts to save him. It was because of this murder that New York City Mayor Jimmy Walker dubbed Vincent Cole a mad dog. When police arrived, they questioned bystanders but couldn't locate the target, who had disappeared in the chaos. Detectives suspected the intended victim was Joe Rayo or a member of his gang, likely targeted by the Cole gang. Cole had recently clashed with Rayo, suffering gunshot wounds but recovering to continue the mob wars. Rayo and Dutch Schultz, though sometimes adversaries, were currently allies in Harlem's bootlegging and gambling ventures and united against the reckless Vincent Cole, whom they both believed deserved to be eliminated. News of the drive-by shooting, dubbed the Baby Massacre, quickly spread throughout New York City, sparking outrage and fear among citizens who demanded immediate action. The NYPD increased patrols in Harlem, with detectives armed with shotguns and tear gas, stopping and searching suspicious vehicles. Despite a large task force of over 50 detectives, gathering information was challenging, as witnesses were either uncooperative or too scared to speak. To encourage cooperation, city officials offered a $30,000 reward. The case gained traction when a former Call gang member, although denying involvement, admitted being present at the scene. A week later, a major break occurred when a robber, in exchange for leniency, provided crucial details, including a description of the gunman's car, and identified 3 shooters as members of the Call gang. While the NYPD focused on the baby massacre, federal prohibition agents targeted Dutch Schultz. In October 1931, they raided his majestic garage beer depot in the Bronx, seizing 3 truckloads of liquor. During the raid, a bomb was thrown into the garage, causing a massive explosion. Although the bombers escaped, a bystander noted their car's license plate, leading to the arrest of a Call gang member who revealed the gang's hideout. The NYPD quickly arrested several gang members, including Vincent Cole, who was found in a hotel disguised to avoid capture. Despite his protests, he was taken into custody without resistance. The day after Cole's arrest, he was swiftly indicted on murder and gun charges tied to the baby massacre. Although it was clear that Cole hadn't acted alone, prosecutors focused their case on him and his lieutenant, Frank Giordano, already convicted for a Schultz mob hit. On December 17, 1931, the trial for the drive-by shooting began. Vincent Cole vehemently denied involvement, claiming he was a victim of enemies who had failed to assassinate him and were now trying to destroy him using the law. Giordano, already on death row, appeared indifferent to the proceedings, knowing his fate was sealed. The prosecution's star witness, George Brecht, an ice cream salesman from Missouri, identified Cole and Giordano as the shooters. Defense attorney Samuel Leibovitz challenged Brecht's credibility, highlighting his financial support from the NYPD, but Brecht insisted his testimony wasn't motivated by the $30,000 reward. Both sides recognized that George Brecht's testimony was crucial for securing a guilty verdict. Defense attorney Samuel Leibovitz made a final attempt to undermine Brecht's credibility, emphasizing discrepancies between his testimony and that of other witnesses. The most significant difference was Brecht's confident identification of Cole and Giordano, while teenage survivors claimed that the gunmen pulled their hats low, hiding their faces. Despite this, Brecht insisted he saw the shooters clearly. As the trial neared its conclusion on Christmas Eve, a surprising twist occurred. A Brooklyn probation officer who knew Brecht contacted the court with damaging information about the state's key witness. This last-minute revelation provided the defense with the leverage they needed to challenge the integrity of the prosecution's case. Using the new evidence, defense attorney Samuel Leibovitz exposed George Brecht's criminal past. It revealed that he had a history of theft, time spent in a mental institution, and a reputation as a so-called professional witness in St. Louis. This revelation destroyed the prosecution's case, leading the judge to direct the jury to return a not guilty verdict for Cole and Giordano. Brecht was subsequently sent to Bellevue Hospital for observation. Though Cole was acquitted, he remained in custody due to pending charges. After posting bail on New Year's Eve, he was released but found himself under relentless police surveillance. His criminal activities were severely restricted, and he was reduced to guarding crap games for income. Meanwhile, a $50,000 bounty was rumored to be on his head, though the source of the reward remained unclear. It is also worth noting that after the baby massacre, Salvatore Maranzano allegedly hired Vincent Cole for the job of killing Lucky Luciano. However, that never happened as Maranzano was killed instead, and while the killers were running away, they actually bumped into Vincent Cole and then shouted that cops would be coming. On February 1, 1932, gunmen with automatic weapons burst into a Bronx dinner party, targeting members of the Cole gang. The attack left 2 Cole gang members and a woman dead, with 4 others wounded. The shooters had been searching for the Mad Dog, who narrowly escaped due to his habitual tardiness. Detectives suspected Dutch Schultz was behind the assault. Just a week later, Mad Dog Cole was in a Manhattan pharmacy when a large sedan pulled up outside. 3 men emerged. One entered the store, pulled a Tommy gun, and ordered everyone to stay calm. He then fired a lethal barrage through the phone booth where Cole was speaking, killing him instantly at the age of 23. The killers took off in their car. They were chased unsuccessfully up 8th Avenue by a foot patrolman who had heard the gunshots and commandeered a passing taxi, but the car got away. Cole's killers were never identified, however. Dutch Schultz's attorney Dixie Davis later suggested that gangster Bo Weinberg was the getaway driver. Another suspect was Edward Fats McCarthy, one of Cole's own men. Even though the Dutchman must have been filled with joy, his illicit empire inevitably drew the attention of Thomas Dewey, the ambitious special prosecutor determined to bring down the notorious bootlegger on tax evasion charges. Simultaneously, in New York, Charles Lucky Luciano was meticulously laying the groundwork for an organization destined to redefine organized crime. His efforts would culminate in the creation of the Commission, an institution that would become the ultimate governing body of the American Mafia. During the Roaring Twenties, liquor traffickers faced minimal consequences. Until 1929, the typical sentence for a major Volstead Act violation was just 2 years in federal prison, often shortened by early parole. With sufficient bribes, a bootlegger could secure a pardon or enjoy special privileges, including furloughs for business matters. Securing a conviction for bootlegging was notoriously difficult due to widespread corruption and public indifference. Many citizens viewed liquor trafficking as a minor infraction and felt that prosecuting such cases was a misuse of resources. As a result, bootleggers often managed to avoid arrest through bribery or, if they did face trial, could rely on sympathetic juries to acquit them. In the 1920s, the federal government introduced a new personal income tax to compensate for the lost revenue from liquor taxes. This tax was unfamiliar to many, leading to both inadvertent and deliberate non-compliance. To demonstrate the serious consequences of tax evasion, the feds targeted high-profile figures, including movie stars, with extensive media coverage that highlighted the risks of defying the Bureau of Internal Revenue. In the criminal underworld, there was a belief that income from illegal activities such as bootlegging and gambling was not subject to taxation. This was a misguided notion, as the federal government was entitled to tax all income, regardless of its source. Despite this, many bootleggers continued to disregard the income tax laws. In the early days of Prohibition, the Bureau of Internal Revenue pursued bootleggers in a haphazard manner. Those who lived extravagantly and flaunted large amounts of cash were more likely to draw the attention of revenue agents, regardless of their standing in organized crime. Lower-level criminals were often targeted more than their higher-ups. While income tax evasion carried severe penalties, the Treasury Department prioritized financial recovery over imprisonment. In June 1931, federal authorities launched a new offensive against New York's top criminals, targeting tax fraud as their primary weapon. The Treasury Department's Special Intelligence Unit, led by an expert team, focused on gathering evidence against racketeers like Dutch Schultz. Soon after, a major raid by the Bronx County District Attorney and federal investigators seized crucial documents from Schultz's trucking company. Realizing the gravity of the situation, Schultz attempted to settle his back taxes with cash offers to avoid prosecution, but the federal government was determined to imprison him. Despite Schultz's offers, including a $100,000 payment for taxes and another $100,000 for Franklin Roosevelt's campaign, the feds rejected all attempts at negotiation. By New Year's 1933, the investigation was intensifying, with evidence and testimonies being presented to grand juries and Schultz's lieutenants jailed for contempt. On January 18, 1933, federal authorities issued an arrest warrant for Dutch Schultz on income tax evasion charges. This followed extensive investigations led by New York City Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey, and 8 days later, a grand jury indicted Schultz. Soon after, A break-in at the district attorney's office in Manhattan resulted in the theft of critical evidence related to the case, including telephone records, business contracts, and delivery receipts. Despite the setback, the investigation continued, though slowed by the need to reconstruct lost documents. Law enforcement struggled to locate Schultz, who was rumored to have fled the country. They pursued leads in Canada, Mexico, Bermuda, and even Cuba. He remained in New York City for the most part, using multiple apartments for cover and disguising himself with glasses and a mustache. Although sightings of him were reported, he continued to elude authorities. Underworld sources reported that Dutch Schultz was seen regularly in Harlem, where he allegedly attended meetings to maintain control. Despite press reports on his activities, law enforcement struggled to capture him, with some suggesting that Schultz might be bribing officials to remain elusive. In June 1933, the arrest of rival bootlegger Waxy Gordon for tax fraud diverted federal attention away from Schultz. However, after Gordon's trial concluded in December 1933, Schultz's case was revived as a top priority. By January 1934, nearly a year after Schultz's indictment, the NYPD intensified their search, following leads that suggested he was residing in Westchester. A high-ranking police officer criticized the department's failure to apprehend him, and 2 detectives known for their tenacity were assigned to track down the elusive Dutchman. In November 1934, the Treasury Department and the New York City Mayor, Fiorello LaGuardia, committed additional resources to locating Dutch Schultz. However, later that month, federal agents were reported to have Schultz under surveillance near Saratoga, New York. On the day before Thanksgiving, a gaunt man in a disheveled blue suit, dark overcoat, and gray hat walked into the U.S. Commissioner's office in Albany, New York. He identified himself as Arthur Flegenheimer and declared his intention to surrender. Accompanied by attorney James Noonan, Schultz's case was explained to the surprised commissioner. Within hours, Schultz was incarcerated in Albany County's new escape-proof jail. He spent a quiet Thanksgiving in his cell, enjoying a special holiday meal. His bail was initially set at $50,000 and later doubled. On April 15, 1935, Dutch Schultz's long-awaited tax trial began in Syracuse. He was charged with evading taxes on approximately $92,000 of income from illegal activities between 1929 and 1931. The prosecution claimed Schultz's beer business had earned over $2.8 million during those years, though they conceded that the actual amount was likely higher. The state planned to present evidence which included over $1.6 million in Schultz's bank accounts, with suspicions of additional undiscovered accounts. The prosecution planned to use wiretap evidence, calling telephone company workers to testify about Schultz's numerous phone lines, which were routed through a central switchboard handling over 1,000 calls monthly. Detectives from the NYPD's Secret Service unit provided crucial testimony, revealing that Schultz's calls mostly involved beer orders, complaints, and interactions with henchmen, politicians, and rivals. The wiretap notes demonstrated Schultz's tight control over his beer distribution and his significant political influence. The notes also showed his volatile temperament, particularly in his exchanges with rivals like Vincent Cole. During breaks in his tax trial, Dutch Schultz expressed confidence, criticizing the government's expense on his case as disproportionate. The trial, lasting nearly 3 weeks, ended in jury deliberations. After hours of deliberation, the jury appeared deadlocked. Some jurors were reportedly discussing the case, while others had ceased and played pinochle. The judge ordered the jury to be locked up overnight. The next day, the jury remained deadlocked and was ultimately dismissed, leading to a mistrial. Reports indicated a split of 7 jurors favoring conviction and 5 for acquittal. For the retrial, the venue was Malone, New York, due to the federal district court circuit rotation. The jurors, initially deadlocked after a lengthy debate, were instructed by the judge to take a dinner break and then continue their deliberations. After the break, they returned with a surprising verdict: not guilty. Dutch Schultz's legal troubles continued immediately after his acquittal in Malone. He was ordered to court by the New York State Department of Taxation and Finance over a $36,000 tax warrant, later increased to $70,000. On October 10, 1935, a federal judge issued an arrest warrant for Schultz on tax misdemeanors. Given that New Jersey had jurisdiction, an extradition hearing was set in Newark, with the possibility of Schultz being moved to New York for a new trial. Schultz's primary concern was the racketeering charges brought by special prosecutor Thomas Dewey. A felony conviction could mean a lengthy prison sentence, allowing his rivals to take over his operations. Facing Dewey, known for his integrity and toughness, Schultz knew that bribery wouldn't work and needed a strategy to counter this formidable adversary. Sources with inside knowledge of Dutch Schultz's plan to murder Thomas Dewey reported various accounts, but a consistent detail emerged. Schultz sought assistance from Murder Incorporated, the notorious enforcement arm of the commission led by Louis Buchalter and Albert Anastasia. To ensure Dewey's assassination, Schultz approached Murder Incorporated's board, as well as Luciano. He emphasized the threat Dewey posed to all mobsters, arguing that if Dewey could imprison him, he could target any mob boss. Schultz insisted that Dewey needed to be eliminated for the safety of the entire criminal organization. The Murder Incorporated board, while acknowledging the threat Thomas Dewey posed, decided to proceed with caution. They first commissioned a feasibility study to assess whether Dewey could be killed without the assassin getting caught. Accounts differ on who conducted the surveillance. Some say a Schultz lieutenant, while others claim it was Albert Anastasia. Anastasia reportedly shadowed Dewey daily, pretending to be a father out with his child, either pushing a baby in a pram or walking with a young boy on a tricycle. He discovered that Dewey's bodyguards waited outside while Dewey entered a drugstore each morning, making it a potential spot for the hit. However, despite the feasibility, the Murder Incorporated bosses, mainly Luciano, decided against the assassination. They believed killing Dewey would draw too much unwanted attention and could lead to a nationwide crackdown on organized crime. Luciano argued that the repercussions would outweigh the benefits. Besides, the murder would likely spark public outrage and intense law enforcement scrutiny. Moreover, Luciano and the others felt confident that their skilled lawyers, combined with bribery and the occasional disappearance of key witnesses, could handle any legal challenges Dewey might present. Ultimately, they concluded that Schultz was overstating the danger Dewey posed. The Murder Incorporated bosses became increasingly concerned that Dutch Schultz might pose a greater threat to them than Thomas Dewey. Schultz was becoming desperate under the pressure of legal troubles, and they feared he might become government informant to save himself, potentially exposing the entire organization. Luciano, in particular, had a vested interest in Schultz's downfall. Schultz's legal problems had weakened his control over his criminal enterprises, allowing Luciano to encroach on Schultz's Harlem rackets. Luciano strongly opposed the idea of killing Dewey, fearing it would bring too much heat on the mob. When the Murder Incorporated board vetoed Schultz's assassination plan, Schultz was furious. Despite their decision, he was determined to go ahead with the murder, confident that he could carry out the hit without their help. Schultz boldly claimed that Dewey would be dead within 48 hours. On the night of October 23, 1935, Dutch Schultz was dining at the Palace Chop House and Tavern in Newark, New Jersey. The Chop House, conveniently located near his hotel, served as his informal command center. Schultz was joined by his bodyguards, Bernard Rosenkrantz and Abe Landau, and later by his wife Frances Flegenheimer. Throughout the evening, others, including Otto Abadaba Berman, came and went. As the night wore on, Schultz and his companions remained in the quiet backroom, calculating the profits from his various rackets. At one point, Schultz left the room to use the restroom, leaving his associates behind. During this moment, two men entered the chop house. They were heavily concealed, with their overcoat collars turned up and hats pulled low, making their faces difficult to see. As they passed the bartender, one of the men pulled out a gun and ordered him to hit the floor. The bartender quickly complied, anticipating the violence that was about to unfold. The gunman unleashed a hail of bullets in the back room of the Palace Chop House, targeting Dutch Schultz's loyal men, Bernard Rosenkrantz, Otto Berman, and Abe Landau. The first gunman, armed with a pistol, opened fire, striking Rosenkrantz multiple times in the chest, abdomen, and foot. Berman was hit in the neck, shoulder, elbow, and wrist, collapsing onto the floor. Landau was shot in the shoulder, arm, and wrist but managed to draw his weapon, as did Rosenkrantz, and the two returned fire despite their severe injuries. Meanwhile, the second gunman pulled a sawed-off shotgun from beneath his overcoat, spraying the room with lead. Amid the chaos, one of the intruders noticed the men's room door. Sensing that Schultz was likely inside, he kicked the door open and fired 2 shots. One bullet tore through Schultz's side, ripping through vital organs before embedding in the floor. The other bullet missed its mark, hitting the bathroom wall. As the first gunman fled through the barroom, the second gunman bolted out of the restroom, dodging the return fire from Landau and Rosenkrantz. The shootout caused pandemonium, with bullets flying wildly, shattering glassware, liquor bottles, and even the cigarette machine. The barrage continued as the gunman escaped, with stray bullets striking a bus across the street and grazing a man's forehead as he stepped off a streetcar. Rosenkrantz collapsed on the barroom floor before he reached the front door. Landau staggered outside, continuing to shoot at the assailant, who escaped into the darkness. Landau then slumped onto a trash can, dropping his gun. Despite emptying his weapon, he hadn't struck the attacker. Schultz, injured and clutching his side, emerged from the bathroom, fell into a chair and rested his head on the table. He urgently requested a doctor. Rosenkrantz, despite his severe injuries, managed to stand up. He retrieved a quarter from his pocket, left it on the bar, and asked the bartender for change. The bartender, stunned, provided him with nickels for the payphone. Rosenkrantz, barely able to walk, used the bar counter for support as he made his way to the phone booth. Leaning against it, he dialed the operator and requested emergency help, whispering that he needed an ambulance and was in critical condition. When asked for the address, Rosenkrantz, too weak to respond, couldn't give the address, but bystanders who heard the shots alerted the police. Officers arrived quickly and tried to question the wounded men, but they only provided vague responses. Schultz claimed he didn't know the attackers, while Rosenkrantz, despite his condition, told an officer to leave him alone and get him an ice cream soda. In the emergency room, Schultz received morphine for pain and requested to see Father Cornelius McInerney as well as his wife. Despite the officer's questions about the shooting, Schultz remained uncooperative. Berman died shortly after arriving at the hospital, with Abe Landau passing away at dawn. Rosenkrantz survived longer but died the next day. Schultz underwent surgery hours later, with doctors finding severe damage to his spleen, stomach, colon, and liver, as well as internal bleeding and peritonitis. Despite these complications, he seemed to improve after the surgery, maintaining his sense of humor by referring to morphine as bonbons if he needed a dose. Schultz's wife, mother, and Father McInerney kept vigil at his bedside. He expressed a desire to die in the Catholic faith, leading the priest to baptize him and administer the last rites. As Schultz fluctuated between clarity and delirium, he spoke in a disjointed stream of consciousness. Detectives nearby took notes and decided to have a stenographer record his words. This transcript was hoped to provide clues about his shooter or other unresolved crimes. A secretary continued to take shorthand notes until Schultz fell into a coma and eventually died. According to the death certificate, Schultz died at 8:35 p.m., October 24, 1935. 4 days later, he was buried in a simple private service at the Gate of Heaven Cemetery in Hawthorne, New York. Shortly before his death, fearing that he would be incarcerated as a result of Dewey's efforts, Schultz commissioned the construction of a special airtight and waterproof safe. Inside, he placed $7 million in cash and bonds, equivalent to $160,713,000 in 2024. Schultz and Rosenkrantz then drove the safe to an undisclosed location somewhere in upstate New York and buried it. At the time of his death, the safe was still interred. Typically, mob hits didn't lead to trials, however. Dutch Schultz's murder became an exception. In 1941, over 5 years after the killing, a grand jury in Essex County, New Jersey, indicted Charles the Bug Workman for Schultz's murder. In 1940, as part of the Murder Incorporated investigation, Workman was identified as one of the Schultz assassins by the mob's two biggest turncoats, Abraham Relos and Albert Tannenbaum, and stood trial in New Jersey. Not too far into the trial, Workman stood up and pled no defense. Because he pled guilty, Workman avoided the death penalty and was given a life sentence, but was paroled in 1964.